couples. The bench agreed that words cannot be read into the provisions of the Special Marriage Act for it to include same-sex couples. The Apex Court bench believes that any reading of words into the present laws like Special Marriage Act would tantamount to incursions into the legislative domain. It is the sheer legal impossibility of the idea that has deterred the Supreme Court from crossing that Lakshman Rekha. While the court went on to assert the need for the state to form a committee and to look into the concerns of the community and the need to protect the LGBTQIA community from any kind of harassment, the bench was clearly of the opinion that the legal ground is not fertile for same-sex marriages to get legal recognition in India. Hundreds of laws that would need amendment, the existing regime of personal laws and the absence of a common civil code are some of the core reasons as to why the Supreme Court could not undertake this task. The court has chosen the option of forming a special committee and leaving that task to the union government, a suggestion that came during the hearing. But is this really the end of the road for the community and their fight for rights? They're seeking marriage equality in India. Was this a cause without a case, or perhaps just a small setback in the historic fight for greater rights of the LGBTQIA community? On Brass Tacks tonight, we'll have the biggest legal voices joining us for debating what happened at the Supreme Court, the judgment and its consequences.
There is no universal conception of the institution of marriage, nor is it static. It lies within the domain of Parliament and the state legislatures to enact laws recognizing and regulating queer marriage.
This granting this permission will be very bad. This will be not in accordance with our system prevalent in India.
Even if full marriage equality rights are not given, at least some kind of civil rights would be given, civil unions would be accepted. So it's really sad that even that didn't happen.
The union government, state governments and governments of union territories are directed to 1. Ensure that the queer community is not discriminated against because of their gender identity or sexual orientation.
As a community, feel little disappointed today is that it did not recognize the right of marriage or even civil partnership for gays and lesbians, and have asked Centre to form a committee who will look into it.
Disturbing, disappointing, because we expected in a larger way, court may approve the union of same-sex or same-gender couple in India.
Well, the judgment today does set a stage for some more thought processing, some more questions that must be asked. The key questions that are left in the mind after that historic verdict of the Supreme Court. Has the Supreme Court really struck the right balance between what a legislature must do and what is it that the court can really delve into? Why did the court choose not to overstep the Lakshman Rekha? They've done so many times. That's the argument. Why couldn't they do this in this case? Can the Centre or the special committee really address the concerns of the LGBTQ community? Because on earlier occasions, the Centre has not been so sympathetic to this particular cause. Was this the last word on marriage equality in India? Or perhaps, as I argued, the stage is set for this fight to be fought on some other day with far more different consequences. Well, let me cut across to our first big newsmaker tonight, Mr. Anand Grover, who's a senior advocate, a lawyer for the petitioners. He's also somebody who has vociferously advocated the cause of the LGBTQ community, not just in this case, but in multiple other forums and cases that we have seen earlier. Mr. Grover, it's a pleasure to have you with us on the broadcast. We're also joined by Rahul Ishwar and Prateek Som. But Anand, first to you, are you disappointed after today's judgment? My first question to you.
Well, I'm disappointed, but not disheartened. This is one of the setbacks. We've had setbacks before. I wish that we were able to advance arguments on the fundamental issue of what the court has said, that there's no right to marry. I respectfully disagree. There is right to marry. Just take an example. Let me put the devil in this debate. Suppose tomorrow Parliament were to say nobody can get married. They pass it. What would the court do? They will have to say there's a right, fundamental right to get married, and they'll have to strike it down. So to say there's no fundamental right to marry, in my respectful submission, is totally incorrect. Secondly, though the verdict has not been what we wanted, there are a lot of things in it which are very positive. Justice Chandrachud's judgment has actually very clearly stated that the unions, not civil union, that has to be decided by the committee, but unions of non-heterosexual persons will be protected. There will be sensitization, etc., which are very positive steps.
Sure.
And the majority has not disagreed. So I think it is now firmly established that relationships of the non-heterosexual variety are with us, and the battle for marriage is actually going to be won in the ultimate. Just one thing, why are we saying that there is no equality and discrimination? What is the difference between a homosexual or a non-heterosexual marriage and a heterosexual marriage?
Right.
There's no real difference. The sexual acts are the same. It's only that the people belong to different sexual orientation.
Absolutely.
But to tell them, you can do everything. You can have sex of the type anybody else can have, but we won't allow you to marry.
Yeah.
Now, if you don't allow a person to marry, on the face of it, it is discriminatory. And I wish the court had seen it like that. And in fact, the US judgment on this issue squarely covers us, but we were not able to persuade the court this time.
Anand,
We lost.
Yeah.
So, like we lost in Kaushal, ultimately won in Navtej. So, we are going to win.
I was coming to that you have seen a lot of twists and turns as far as this particular cause for the LGBTQ community is concerned. From being called the unconvicted felons by none other than the Supreme Court to that particular judgment being overturned in a curative petition. There have been historical dramatic developments as far as the apex court of the country is concerned. But when the bench unanimously agrees that marriage is not a fundamental right, why do you still hold on to that hope? The Chief Justice of India, though in a minority opinion on certain positions like recognition of civil partnerships and the right to adopt for the same-sex couples, but do you think that minority judgment is the way forward?
Well, unfortunately, Anusha, the minority judgment also says there is no right to marry.
Yes.
And that is unfortunate because a very liberal and a brilliant judge like Justice Chandrachud has said that. I'm very unhappy about that. But we will persuade future judges or parliamentarians. We are not going to give up on either. I think we can convince parliamentarians also. Sometimes when we were fighting the Nas Foundation case of the Navtej Johar, we were also tweaking with parliamentarians. So we are not going to give up any avenue because justice is on our side. And if justice is on our side, we shall win ultimately.
Another point that has been discussed a lot in the newsroom, in the people that I've spoken to through the day, is that on many occasions the Supreme Court has decided to overstep, quote unquote, and take the call and do the right thing in the interest of justice. That's what Article 32 and the petitions are really about, which are filed under that provision of the Constitution, that the court can do anything in the interest of justice. And many times the Supreme Court has been criticized from certain quarters that, look, you're overstepping. This is not the domain of the judiciary. It's the domain of the legislature. Why do you think in this particular case the court did not bite the bullet? Is it because we have a very complicated sphere of personal laws in India and they are not rationalized under a common civil code? Or perhaps it was a fear or the mammoth task that needs to be undertaken if same-sex marriages are to be recognized? The government argued that about 100 laws will have to change in the country.
Well, just to actually confer the right to marry, you don't have to change laws. If you have to go further in terms of inheritance, guardianship, etc., then you have to change laws. So we restricted our attack only on the inequality and discriminatory aspect of non-heterosexual couples not being able to marry. But I don't know why, but I think there was a strong pushback by the government. And I don't know what influenced the judges to take the decision they have. But I think it's wrong. It's very difficult to fathom the minds of judges. Their opinion is only in the judgment. We have to only take a cue from that. And I think there is an error in the judgment which has to be corrected.
Final question to you, Anand. Legally speaking, with the bench unanimously agreeing, and as you pointed out, even the Chief Justice of India said that there is no fundamental right to marry in this country. With that being said by 5 judges on a constitution bench, legally, is there still scope for any kind of revision?
Well, it is very well said. The Supreme Court is not right because it's right. It is right only because it's the Supreme Court. So judges can actually take a 180 degrees turn depending on how they perceive it. And that's the essence of democracy.
Right.
And I think in future we will be able to persuade judges.
Anand, good luck for your cause and the kind of battles that you've been fighting
Thank
at the
you very
Supreme
much.
Court, and thank you so much for
Pleasure
your
to be.
time. I want to cut
Pleasure.
across to our other guest as well, but before that, let's go to Motorola, India's best 5G smartphone. Brand's tweets of the day. Let's have a look.
Hello, Moto.
Ankit Das Gupta has tweeted that the Supreme Court has passed the buck. Now, in this particular tweet, he also talks about the fact that how various judgments in the past also have not been able to give the kind of justice that the community really wanted. Let's also cut across to some more tweets that have come through the day. The tweets also talk about the kind of historical injustices that have been meted out to the community. And in this particular tweet, what has been spoken of, Tushar Jindal writes about it, that the Supreme Court in the 2018 had said that history owes an apology to the members of the community for delay in ensuring their rights. Human sexuality cannot be reduced to a binary formulation, and decriminalization 377 is but a first step. This particular tweet also talks about how the court has shied away from taking yet another step. These tweets coming in from the members of the community only point out the kind of disappointment that is prevalent. Well, let's take forward the debate. As the legal debate continues, we ask the question, is same-sex marriage a cause without a case? There is a cause that the Supreme Court has agreed with. They have spoken about it, and in fact, the entire judgment is sympathetic to the cause. But there could be nothing tangibly delivered in this particular case. Well,
Hello, Moto.
well, let's cut across to our guests as well who are joining us on the broadcast. Harish Iyer, he's an equal right activist. He's with us on the show. Ashok Kavi, he's an equal right activist. Rahul Ishwar, who's an activist. Pratik Som, who's an advocate, joining us on the broadcast. Rahul, first your thoughts on the judgment today. We heard Mr. Anand Grover, who was leading the arguments for the petitioners, say that it is indeed a disappointing day, but he's not disheartened.
I'm a right conservative person, but everyone in the spectrum and everyone across the spectrum agrees that there should not be any homophobia, there should not be any attitude of discrimination. But the complex question, the multi-layered question is, can the status of marriage be accorded to homosexual relations? There are religious, spiritual, cultural, family, many arguments that are forwarded on many spaces. That's the reason why we have to take it slow. Of course, more education, more sensitization needed. We have one of the finest liberal progressive judges of our nation, Sri Chandrachud, at the helm, controlling the entire narrative, and he is the master of the rooster. At the same point of time, a huge majority of our society, many institutions, political parties have their own inhibitions regarding this. That's the reason why I keep on requesting my good friend Mr. Harish Iyer and Sri Ashok Kaviji like persons, educate us more, let us engage more, as there are many people who are having many inhibitions regarding these things. Can the status of marriage, which is sacrosanct in Hindu, Muslim, Christian, Jew, Jain, Buddhist, every religion, can that particular heterosexual marriage, which is thousands of years old, can the particular status be accorded? At the right point of time, I believe everyone agrees that what Justice Chandrachud rightly said, there are issues of extortion by corrupt cops, there are harassment issues, which everyone agrees. And on a humanistic principle, we should definitely be against all these things. But on a principle, there are debates and there are respectful disagreements that need to be, that is already there. I think more and more engagement with the civil society, with the people who oppose them are the way ahead, and more sensitization is the way ahead. And there are people with very respectful disagreements to the entire homosexual community's premise.
All right, Harish, what is your view on what has been said? I mean, it is not the first time that we are hearing these arguments that, okay, you have a right to be your natural self, to own your sexuality, to be expressive of your sexual orientation, but look, you can't marry. Marriage is about heterosexual couples, and it should be left there. No religion recognizes homosexual partnership as marriage in a country like India, where personal laws largely govern the marriage sphere. Harish, am I audible to you? Can you hear me? Okay, Harish, am I audible to you? Can you hear me?
I can't hear.
You can't. I'll just try and fix that audio. My team will get in touch with you. Prateek Som is also with us on the broadcast. We also have Ashok Kavi who is with us on the show. Ashokji, first to you. The fact that marriage has always had a heteronormative definition and religions, across the spectrum recognize marriage as a companionship or a partnership of heterosexual couples. The homosexual definition does not exist. And that becomes important in a country like India because there is a whole regime of personal laws that govern the sphere of family law. Ashokji.
You see, I wanted to start right from 2018 when the Section 377 was read down, where we then became citizens of this country and not felons anymore.
Yes.
So one would have thought that the citizenship entitlements come automatically to us under the judgment, of 2018. But instead of that, the Supreme Court has kicked up the whole issue to the executive. Mr. Anand Grover says that there was a pushback from the government. We could see that during the arguments that were going on in the Supreme Court, especially Tushar Mehta making extraordinary statements, and you could see that there was a pushback.
Yeah.
But the bench should have understood that this was what the government was doing and should have immediately come in to remove the discrimination and go ahead with just basic civil laws.
Yeah.
As far as we are concerned.
Yeah.
The citizenship entitlements given by the government are important, for the very existence and the health and mental health of the community. So I don't understand why there's so much argument going on. France legalized the issues, especially among same-sex couples.
Ashokji,
by
can
giving them
I
civil
make
unions and
an
partnership.
argument with you?
Yes.
And also because you're somebody who understands, how important this is for the community. I'm all for marriage equality. If you were to ask my ideological position, I believe any two individuals who want to enter into an institution of marriage, irrespective of their sexual orientation, should be legally allowed to do so. But I'm also very well aware of the legal scape that exists in this country. No other democratic country across the world has a parallel verse of personal laws governing the space of family law sphere. Family law in India is one of the most complicated spheres. We do not have a common civil code. Had we had a common civil code in this country, the reform of those laws would have been far more easier for the courts to do. Right now, more than 100 laws need to be changed, and these are just statutory provisions. We are not even talking about the sphere of the personal laws, which makes the matter all the more complicated. The argument I'm coming to, Ashokji, is that should the movement realign itself and talk about the idea of a UCC? Have you ever thought about that?
No, in fact, the UCC would have been one method by which, we could have taken this Special Marriages Act, and then we would not have run into any problems if there was a UCC. But because of the personal laws, any effort to reform and reformulate the Special Marriages Act will come to naught. That there's just no doubt that the UCC would have helped a lot.
UCC would have helped a lot. Harish, do you agree? I mean, this is not something that was directly debated upon when the hearings were happening. But one of the arguments that was made by Mr. Tushar Mehta, and he threw that argument at the court and said, look, you can't skirt the issue of personal laws. If you want to talk about marriage equality in India, here all the state governments, marriage is a concurrent subject, deal with the issue of personal laws and then come to the point of marriage equality. And in my learned opinion, in my limited understanding, he was right legally. You can't skirt the issue of personal law, and this is something that perhaps the community needs to think and talk about. UCC, without that, how can you have marriage equality in India? Harish.
Well, some kind of legal recognition for for marriages was something that we're looking for. In whatever form that it could come, if it came from UCC or it came from any kind of legal recognition that I could have with my partner, okay, which will give, you call it marriage, you call it whatever you want, but any form of legal recognition that we get to our relationship would have eased the way for various other things, whether it's UCC with when UCC actually has a clear clear mandate, and it actually specifies that it's not just going to be another heterosexual jumla. And it made space for LGBTQI plus people, whether it was that or whether it was anything else. I think one of the most important aspects is some kind of legal recognition, that LGBTQI plus relationships could get. Because with Section 377 being read down, we are free to have sex in private with consent. But we just don't need that right. We need rights more than that. And as of now, we just have got that right. That if we are having sex in private in our bedrooms, the state cannot peep within. There's no other right that's been afforded to the LGBTQI plus people, and we are treated as second-class citizens because of that.
No, but Harish, I don't think any judge on the bench disagrees with the spirit of what you have said. I believe the time has come in this country that we can all agree on the morality, benchmark, that marriage equality should be the norm of the day. Any two consenting individuals, if they want to enter an institution which is legally and socially recognized, they should be allowed to do so. There should not be any discrimination. The question is of how. How are we going to do it? And the court could not find a way. With the ways that were suggested by the petitioners, they were not acceptable. Do you have faith on the government? Because now the matter is with the government and a special committee that will be formulated.
I have zero faith on the government, to be very frank. Solicitor General Tushar Mehta has very clearly affirmed every time that he was there, the kind of statements that he made about urban elite, that even the judges alluded to in this thing, that it's not an urban or an elite concept, also goes on. That was the government stand when urban elite was a term that was coined by the government. So it's important for us to realize that. But
so you don't have much hope. You don't have much hope from the government, Prateek Som. The government has not infused a lot of confidence into the community, and that's not without their basis and substance, because in the past the government has not taken a view which has been very sympathetic to the petitioners. Prateek.
So, of course, the primary and make laws. The Supreme Court to make the laws under the ambit of powers of the judicial review. Now, this present is on.
Prateek, there's a problem with your audio. It's fading in and fading out. We're not able to hear you clearly. We'll just try and fix that audio. All right, I'll go back to my guests, but right now I'm cutting across to Dr. Abhishek Manu Singhvi. He's a third-time sitting member of Parliament, also a leading jurist, somebody who has argued this case vociferously before the bench at the Supreme Court of India for the petitioners. Dr. Singhvi, it's always a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you so much for sparing time. Are you disappointed with what the Supreme Court has said today?
I must confess that I'm disappointed. The reason is that I believe it's a historic opportunity lost. It's a historic opportunity lost because the judges seem to have been affected by this huge behemoth of a public antipathy against something which is a kind of a revolutionary reaction against something bad. But actually, if you look at it, just consider, they were asked at the bottom line to read into some parts of the SMA. Wherever husband and wife is used or couple is used, this could include same-sex persons. Now, that's not a leap of the faith at all. That's not a legal acrobatic which will shock you or stun you. For example, when they read consultation in the Constitution to mean concurrence and thereby took the entire power of judicial appointments, it was a much bigger leap of the faith or a much bigger legal acrobatic.
Sure.
For example, when they read substantive due process as part of Article 14, something which, by the way, our founders in the Constitution had specifically rejected, there was a far greater legal acrobatic than being asked for in this case. For example, when they read so many other things in terms of, for example, basic structure of the Constitution, these are much bigger interpretive leaps that we were asking for. So I'm a little disappointed. Now, certainly the Chief Justice has gone the farthest, but somehow, despite holding the judicial reviews available, despite holding that separation of powers legislature versus judiciary is not a obstacle, I think the judges have stopped short of walking the talk. What they've given are relatively cosmetic, marginal things. You cannot discriminate in the public. I cannot deny you housing or something, or I will not deny you hospital facilities because you are a couple. In fact, the Chief Justice has gone farthest in the case of adoption, but that will be clearly treated as a minority opinion because nobody else has joined him on that. My point is that you've taken the soft option. And remember one basic point I want to underline. The heart and core of my submission was that you should not allow discrimination to arise based on ascriptive conditions. What is ascriptive? Ascriptive is involuntary, not by choice. Gender orientation, sexual preference, sexual orientation. Now, here this basic point is arising out of involuntary, not by choice, ascriptive conditions that they haven't answered. The only answer to that would be to recognize marriage. And what's so great about recognizing marriage in the SMA, they're not distorting the act. We said it would be religion neutral. We are not making a distinction between Islamic person or other. It could be easily read to be religion neutral. Already today, as you know, a Muslim and a Hindu can marry under that act. A Christian can marry under the act. It's a registrable marriage. So I think here somewhere there has been a phobia of public antipathy, which really I think is a false notion.
Public antipathy, an interesting argument that you raised. Sir, that takes me to another point that the judges spoke of. In fact, the Chief Justice of India spoke of it. That long judgment of about 340 pages also has a particular section that talks about separation of powers. And you rightly reminded how on various occasions tweaking, different interpretations or judicial acrobatics have been done to do the right thing in the interest of justice. And today, one of the biggest questions which has been there on the minds of the community, in the mind of the petitioners, and everybody who believes in marriage equality is that why couldn't the court really take the leap of faith? Now, that being said and done, it's done and dusted, that judgment is already out. Do you really have faith in the government, or the petitioners really have faith in the government? Because the kind of positions that the government has taken in the past has not really been sympathetic to the cause.
Firstly, the whole point is that had the judges done what we had asked, it would have required minimalistic reading into the SMA and there would have been no leap. That's the first point. Second, the examples I gave are much bigger leaps, taken more easily than the leap asked for here. Thirdly, the government will gladly add these cosmetic soft options in the committee. But there is no way in which substantive right, what are these people looking at? These people whom we represent, petitioners, are wanting substantive equality. They are wanting decisional autonomy. They are wanting the free speech and expression part of their life to include the free speech of expressing themselves as a married couple. Now, these things you can take it from me. This government certainly not, and few other governments I expect to enact into law. In which case, this is nothing but a will-o'-the-wisp, a call for eternity with no real concrete solution in sight. You are actually affecting their dignity, their right to dignity, decisional autonomy, privacy, and expectation of a non-discriminatory format in a manner which allows them to live their life as equals by not recognizing them as married couples. There has been no revolution and no breakup of society if the SMA, and remember, we limited it to SMA. So today, if two Hindus want to marry outside the SMA, they cannot do it as a couple of the same sex. If two Christians or a Hindu or a Muslim, it's only for those who opt for the SMA, which is in a sense largely 99% intended to be religion neutral, caste neutral, backdrop neutral. In which case, why can't it be for both people of the same sex? It only meant that you read husband, wife or the word couple a little differently.
Yeah. Sir, one point that was mentioned by Solicitor General as well during the course of the hearing was that the issue of marriage equality cannot be dealt with by the courts or, whenever the matter is debated without really touching upon the issue of personal laws. I know the petitioners were very categoric that they don't want to go there. The argument of the centre was that you cannot skirt the issue of personal laws and you have to hear the various states on it. Do you believe that argument has had a bearing on the judgment?
Certainly it has had. But it's a red herring.
Yeah.
I stick to my stand. Just consider what you just said. how on earth does it affect personal laws? If the judges make it clear that a marriage under personal laws is unaffected, if that is so, then the SMA also affects personal laws. A Hindu and a Muslim, or for that matter, even two Muslims choosing to marry under SMA are overriding their personal law, aren't they? Then why is it allowed? That is actually a red herring.
Yeah.
It is, that's why I said it's a Hawa created of public antipathy. It's a whole, ambience created of a huge outcry of public opposition. I don't think it's true. I don't think it exists.
Sir, my final question to you, while you expressed your disappointment in your opening comments that you made, are you still hopeful that at some point this would change? I mean, from being called the unconvicted felons by Supreme Court at one point and that historic overturning of that judgment where an unconditional apology was owed, do you think that change can happen yet again?
The world lives on hope. I have no doubt it will change. But also remember, John Maynard Keynes said, in the long run, we are all dead. Now, with 5 judges deciding this is going to be a pretty long run before 7 judges decide otherwise. So, I am hopeful, but I am disappointed. And let me hope that my hope conquers my disappointment, if not in my lifetime, but in the future.
Well, we live to see better times, Dr. Singhvi. Always a pleasure to get your precious time, and thank you so much for joining us on the broadcast and sharing your view. Dr. Abhishek Manu Singhvi, who led the arguments from the side of the petitioners at the Supreme Court of India, one of the leading lawyers and luminaries, talking about the fact that he's disappointed but hopeful that something that most of the petitioners have said. Pratik Som, who's an advocate, continues to be with us on the broadcast. Pratik, you heard the arguments that have been advanced by 2 senior advocates who represented the petitioners. Both argue that there is not much hope from the central government.
I think that's not a correct statement.
I'm afraid, Pratik, we still don't have your audio, we still don't have your voice properly. We'll just try and fix that. Rahul, you want to take that question? Very less faith on the central government.
I think we shouldn't be cynical, and I have been continuously telling my friend Mr. Harish Iyer and the other people in the community that they need to understand a premise called social acceptance comes before legal acceptance. See, I'm a right conservative person. I have difference of opinion with the entire homosexual paradigm, but I believe the right position is having respectful disagreement. Even the court has got that very position. Even Pope Francis, who is a world-respected spiritual figure, has a very similar position to what the Indian BJP government has taken. Pope Francis rightly went on to say that, who am I to judge the creations of God? At the same point of time, Pope Francis or neither the Catholic Church gave the consent for the marriage. So it's a very tricky issue, because there is a huge section of conservative people we represent and we speak to who are having inhibitions regarding the entire paradigm of marriage. Yes, decriminalization is positive, because nobody should be branded criminal, nobody should be harassed, nobody should be discriminated, but asking for marriage needs much more education, much more sensitization, much more reaching out, and much more
But Rahul, just because somebody is going to harass somebody else, which the court has already cautioned that don't do that, can you really deny rights to our community in this manner? I mean, that cannot be the reason. There are many reasons that exist for which the court has said we can't step into it. But just because there are others who would get offended, even if that forms the majority, that's not a judicial reason enough.
Choosing a partner is a different thing from being in marriage, because marriage has been a heterosexual relationship for thousands of years, and nearly all the religions, even those who have conflicting views, maybe Hindu, Muslim, Christian, Jain, Jew, Sikh, everyone agrees on this premise of a heteronormative, like you rightly said earlier, a heterosexual union. So that has been the base of civilization for thousands of years, and the family, as we call the heterosexual family, has been the base of society. So there will naturally be inhibitions. Justice Chandrachud, who I respectfully disagree with, because I'm a right conservative, is a very liberal progressive judge. He could do as far as he went as far as he could, but at the same point of time there was a resistance from the conservative judges or the conservative circles, and that position has been well documented too. That's the reason why it's a
even the Chief Justice of India said that marriage is not a fundamental right. I mean, the judges were unanimous on that, including the Chief Justice of India. Harish, on that particular note, if that committee is formed and when that committee is formed, will you or the representatives from the community really go forward before them and say, look, these are our demands, listen to us, give us a special law? Would you give that opportunity to the union government?
We will. We will. Why wouldn't we go and speak to our elected representatives? In fact, the elections are very fast approaching. We want to tell them that we are a huge vote bank. There is no Pew Research Center had done some research and they said that LGBTQI plus people could be around 17% in India. So we are a huge vote bank as well. So we will go and speak to them. We'll speak to in fact, that's my appeal to every LGBTQI plus person, even to you, Anushka, that if you could go to your elected representative and put your stance ready over there that, you know what, LGBTQI plus people, these are my friends, these are my family, these are people with real lives, real aspirations, real dreams. Just let them live. If I can marry, if Rahul can marry, and if Rahul tells me that you cannot marry, if you cannot marry, then that's not empathy. That's basically saying something that I will be privileged and I can marry, and you are not privileged and you can't marry. You know, so that's something that needs to stop.
Well, Harish,
and you can ask
I can
Rahul
tell
if
you
he's
that I
married
have
now.
some very close friends like family who were watching, looking at this judgment with a bated breath. They're very disappointed today. And all I could tell them today was that, look, yes, it's a setback, but the last has not been said. The Supreme Court has reversed its judgment earlier, especially when it comes to LGBTQ and the causes decriminalization, and perhaps things will change in the future. Till then, we must continue to have these informed conversations and these discussions, because it's important for the society to be educated, to have better awareness, and for us to have a more equitable society. I'll take that conversation forward with Mr. Siddharth Luthra as well. He's a senior advocate, former ASG, who's joining us on the broadcast. Mr. Luthra, thank you so much for joining us on the show. I asked this question to our other panelists as well, including Mr. Anand Grover and Ms. Dr. Abhishek Manu Singhvi, that are they disappointed? I'll ask you the same question. Are you disappointed after what the court has said today?
Yeah, so my answer is straight. I think the court has rightly said it is not their domain to frame legislation. That's definitely not their domain. And by directing that a committee be set up to look into the reforms, I believe the court has done great service to the nation. Having said that, my expectation and my desire would have been that there should have been some view taken on civil rights. And I was hoping that the civil rights, the fact that you should have rights of adoption, maintenance, other civil rights which are relatable to domestic unions, those should have at least been acknowledged and recognized by the court. But perhaps that's also a case that was not entirely argued by either side.
I mean, according to you, with what was read out in the court for about 1.5 hours, and now the judgment copy is also available. But of course, talking about the core reason as to why the court has refused relief, was it surely because there was a mammoth task at hand, over 100 laws that needed to be rationalized, or there was a genuine concern that they would overstep into the domain of the legislature? What is your understanding?
So I think my sense is really it's a question that lies in the domain of the legislature. You're right, there are myriad laws which deal with these issues and the rights of individuals, and therefore those myriad laws, if at all, have to be tinkered with by the legislature and the legislature alone. It cannot be a situation that you have these laws, some which may even be state laws, which are dealt with by a court which perhaps is not aware of the nuances of the various aspects of different laws across the country. Therefore, this is purely and truly a legislative exercise, and the court, in my view, has rightly restrained itself from entering into a legislative domain and has stopped short by giving guidance, by giving protection, directions, certain directions in Justice Chandrachud's judgment, and also expressing a view as to where reform needs to be brought in.
Right.
Very often the court, finding that there's what we call a Lakshman Rekha, stops short of giving certain views, but the silences of these judgments sometimes speak more than their language.
But sir, the other and the counter argument is that the court has overstepped many times, quote unquote. In fact, the Supreme Court has been criticized for often stepping into the domain of the legislature, and the justification has been that the court must take extraordinary steps in the interest of doing the right thing and the interest of justice. Why couldn't the court do it this time?
So it's very simple. There are domains where there is no legislative device that exists, there's no law that exists, and there are international treaties. In such cases, for example, Sakshi, for example, Ritesh Sinha, they've intervened and given directions awaiting the existence or the creation of a law.
Yes.
For example, POCL, before Regulation 419A of the telegraph rules came in, 419A's precursor was the 1997 decision in POCL. That was a decision to fill the gap till law came into being. But the moment the law came, that's 419A came, which has been now amended myriad number of times, you have now a legislative framework. And the written rule, and I will not call it an unwritten rule, is that don't step in when there's a law, or at least, to put it simply, try not to step in where there's a law. And if at all, step in an area where there are international obligations, treaty obligations.
Mr. Luthra, the centre has not been supportive to the cause of the LGBTQ community. Can the community really pin its hope on this committee that was earlier suggested by the centre? And now the Supreme Court is also saying that the committee must look into it. To what extent can the community pin its hope on this particular committee which has been talked about?
I think just because at a point of time, a dispensation was not supporting a certain community does not mean that view cannot change.
Yeah.
These are people we elect. It is for us to choose who we elect. And once we decide to ask political parties to consider their proposals for an election or proposals of their manifestos in terms of the needs and rights of certain communities, including the LGBT community, I believe that change will come. It may not come today. It may come after 5 years, 4 years, 10 years. But there's an election around the corner. I think it's a very important time. The judgments come at an important time when this is a matter which can be raised as a debate in the oncoming elections. It may not occupy the major space, but at least that space has been created. At least that debate has begun.
Absolutely. I agree with you that space is created, that debate is one. I thank all our panelists and our special newsmakers, Mr. Siddharth Luthra, joining us on the broadcast. Well, let's go to Motorola, India's best 5G smartphone, brand's tweets of the day.
Hello, Moto.
Well, Ankit Das Gupta has tweeted that the Supreme Court has passed the buck. It comes down to this. Does the government have any compulsion to listen to the CGI? Well, we don't think so. In conclusion, the fight will be on. Many activists like Ankit Das Gupta who support the community or who are a member of the community have supported it, they've said that they're going to take this fight forward. We have more tweets that have come in through the day. Here's one by Tushar Jindal, and he talks about how history owes an apology. These are quotations from the Supreme Court, which was said in the 2018 judgment that human sexuality cannot be reduced to a binary. Yet, the Supreme Court refuses to take the second step and change history even after 5 years. This disappointment that you hear is something that has been, rampant across the community, especially the members and the petitioners who were looking forward to this judgment. Well, up next, amid the raging Israel-Hamas conflict and the unending hostage crisis, CNN News 18's Zakir Jacob spoke to former Israeli negotiator Daniel Levy. That conversation after a quick break.
Hello, Moto.
To 5,000 people that stayed in the city. The rest of them have been evacuated and they're living either with family outside of Sderot or in hotels. the government and the city, really, the city is providing for them, making sure that they have everything that they need, from mental health support to clothing and food and provisions and anything that they need. And right now we're trying to take care of also, we have people on the ground from the municipality in every hotel and trying to see if there are any needs that come up, and whatever people need, we're taking care of.
So we know that on 7th of October there was total rampage and mayhem that was done by the terrorists.
Right.
I mean, if you could describe how the situation in the town on that day, how did it all
So what
all
happened
start?
that day?
Yes,
So really, at 6 o'clock in the morning, sirens went off, and when sirens go off, people here know to go into the shelters. Because it was a holiday, people were supposed to be walking, to synagogues that morning, and it's a Saturday. But because of the sirens, people weren't on the streets, thankfully. Because the minute that happened, we had a few jeeps. I do not know if it was 3 or 4 jeeps, heavily equipped with military and equipment, guns, explosives, you name it. And they just went through town, through the main street, and then they separated into a few streets. One of them came to the police station that we see the remainings of right here, and they took over the police station, and the rest of them were just going around town and killing anyone that they could. Anyone. People were shot in their cars. There was a minibus here with people that were going on a trip for the day. They shot all of them, all 13 people in the cars. They were just running around trying to kill people as they go. The police, the minute the police was able to do something, they did. The minute our security team, the minute they heard anything, gunshots, whatever that was, they put their gear on and they went to the streets to actually look for these terrorists and to have some kind of a face-to-face with them so they can finish them off. But it was brutal. They came very prepared. They knew exactly what they were doing. And the minute they got a hold of the police station, they got the higher ground, and there was a sniper or 2 snipers on the top of the building, and they were really killing anybody around you. Now you can see this is a populated area, so people were stuck in their homes.
Elith, how many hours it took the security forces actually before they could take control of the city entirely?
So it took a long time, because you have to understand the army was surprised as well, and the army was on fighting the front line of the kibbutzim and the moshavim right there. So really in Sderot, by the time we got the help and by the time we got a hold of the situation, roughly 36 hours, which is a very long time to be home and scared. I got a lot of calls from people calling me and saying there are gunshots by my window, there are gunshots in the streets, not knowing if it's soldiers or if it's Hamas. So it was very, very scary.
With the kind of city and the situation, how soon do you think the city can go back to normal, people can come back and they will live?
Listen, I'm not a prophet and I have no idea what the government is planning. I do know one thing, that the mayor of the city is already planning ahead, and they understand that in order for us to be able to recover, the minute the military operation ends, we have to be prepared for our people. And we're going to do anything and everything that we need to in order to do that. So we're raising funds right now to be able to rebuild our homes. There's so many homes that have been hit, about 74 direct hits into people's homes. Some people have nowhere to go back to, right? So we're going to be able to rebuild it. We're going to be able to give them what they need when it comes to mental.
So the world has been watching in horror, first the events of October 7th when Hamas terrorists attacked Israeli civilians, citizens, elderly, women, children, took a large number of them hostage. And then subsequently, there is growing concern about this humanitarian catastrophe which is about to unleash itself because Israel is preparing for a massive ground operation. The United Nations has warned that asking more than 1 million people to evacuate from North Gaza with virtually just 24 hours notice is inviting a humanitarian catastrophe. What led to this, and more importantly, where is this story headed? I'm now joined by Mr. Daniel Levy. He's a former Israeli negotiator for peace. He was part of the negotiation process for the Oslo Accords back in the 1990s. Thank you very much, Mr. Levy, for speaking with us here on CNN News 18.
Thank you, Zaha.
Let me start off by asking you, first things first, the events of October 7th, when Hamas terrorists in large numbers across different locations, more than 24 locations almost, attacked Israeli civilians, many of them the most vulnerable, whether it's elderly or babies. Why do you think that was the case? We haven't seen anything quite of this magnitude in the last decade and a half that Hamas has been active.
actually never. We've never seen anything of this magnitude. And look, on the Israeli side, there is clearly a monumental failure of intelligence, of deterrence, of initial military response. Obviously, Israel has a certain reputation, right? Not considered to be an intelligence or a military minnow. It's prided itself on that reputation. So there will be a very serious investigation the morning after. And Prime Minister Netanyahu is probably not very keen to reach the morning after for that very reason. Now, if you're asking from the side of Hamas, how did this happen? There's some suggestions that Hamas was itself somewhat taken aback by the number of people it managed to get through multiple border openings that it achieved, and that perhaps there were irregulars. In other words, Palestinians in Gaza, suddenly the gate opens, they come across, were they armed, were they given arms? I think there's a lot of unanswered questions there. There was, of course, a horrific and tragic outcome to that attack. And as you say, we're now witnessing the second wave, which is you have a war crime, and now we seem to be in the throes of another war crime.
I'll get to that in just a second, but I want to know, whenever, countries and countries that are democracies have faced attacks on their civilians. We saw this with 9/11 in the United States. We saw this here in this country, in India, with the 26/11 attacks. And now with Israel, with these mass number of civilians, over 1,000 civilians being killed in Israel. It's never happened in its history. How are democratic countries that believe in the rule of law and that are expected to operate within the laws that govern the Committee of Nations, how are they expected to respond? Because the terrorists on the other side, by attacking civilians, are not exactly playing by established rules, are they?
Well, I think it's a very important point. I think in this case, you have to bear in mind that Israel, of course, is a democracy for those inside what it defines as its system, but it imposes a non-democratic control on the Palestinians. So you have this kind of system where Israel is not, so someone once defined it as Israel is a democracy for its Jewish citizens and a Jewish state for the Arabs. So it doesn't really function as a democracy. And unfortunately, of course, Israel is in violation of international law every day with its illegal actions in the occupied territories, including the illegal settlements. That's why there is a case before the International Criminal Court right now under consideration in terms of the actions that Israel has conducted in the past and the ongoing role that Israel plays vis-a-vis the Palestinians. So I think your starting point is you have already structural violence embedded in the system of Israel's control over the Palestinians, which isn't to excuse the actions of Hamas, but it's not quite this idea of a democracy facing that. I think the reaction when faced with the events of October 7th is precisely how do you operate within the rules? And I think that what we've seen is that by operating outside of those rules, you do not bring yourself more security. I won't speak to the situation in your own country, but I will speak to, I think, the shortcomings of America's response to 9/11, which did not make America secure. Of course, unlike Israel and India, America went overseas to hunt its demons, which is very different.
I do want to ask you now about the Israeli response. Obviously, over the last 10 days, we've seen airstrikes in over 2,000 different locations. Israel saying that these are targeted attacks of the Hamas leadership, political and military. But it's also saying, and it's mobilized, ground troops in large numbers for a possible ground invasion. It looks imminent. And the justification from the Israeli side is when you have an enemy that uses civilians as shields, where these terrorists are hidden, behind civilians, how else do you flush out the terrorists without a ground operation? That's the justification from the Israeli side. Do you buy that or do you not buy that?
Well, first of all, let's understand At the moment that we're talking, it's unclear exactly when. The question of if seems to have been answered, but the question of when there will be a ground invasion is unclear. But what there has been is a reaction which, and I think this is why people are questioning the reaction so increasingly and quite severely. It's very hard to claim that the reaction has been targeting militants, because the reaction has been to cut water, fuel, electricity, medical, humanitarian supplies to the entire civilian population of Gaza. That's 2 million people. That's not 2 million plus people. That's not going after the militants. The blanket bombing where we've seen 2,800 plus Palestinians killed, including 700 plus children, that's not targeting militants. So I think targeting militants is one thing, but targeting an entire civilian population, that's when you get into you're very far down the road towards war crimes, disproportionality, a failure to distinguish between combatants and civilians. Now, the question of embeddedness in a civilian population is, of course, a much broader one, and it brings to the question of what is Hamas, what is the nature of Palestinian life under Israeli occupation, why is the Palestinian Authority, that is the party, the Fatah, the PLO, that made the agreement with Israel, why has it lost public support? Why is it so reviled by most Palestinians? Not because they love Hamas and its actions, but because they have seen that politically the side that made the peace deals failed to deliver, because all sides failed to live up to their commitments, but especially Israel deepened its occupation. There's no Palestinian state. So it's a question of where Palestinian society is at, living this way of having its statehood and its freedoms denied for so long, which causes this situation in the civilian population also.
So that brings us to the next question, which is, yes, Israel is going in. They've done airstrikes. Like I said, the ground operation looks imminent. But let's say the objective of this entire Operation Iron Swords, as it's called, is to debilitate Hamas. It's to ensure that Hamas cannot launch the kind of attacks that it did on Israeli citizens last weekend. What happens after that? And if at all, A, can Israel achieve that objective? Is it possible for Israel to achieve that objective? And B, if they do, what then comes after Hamas? That's also a question that needs to be asked.
That's a very good question, Zaka. I appreciate you asking it. I think the question of what happens after is perhaps not so different to the question of how did we get to where we were before, which is, can you have an opening to a politics, to a political, diplomatic, non-violent process that gives Palestinians a reasonable expectation that they cannot live under occupation forever? And so I think if there were a narrative saying, look, this is about ending a militant insurgency that has caused great pain to our civilians so that we can get to a place of political conflict resolution, then that would be a very interesting position to be in. If we were in that position, we probably would not have seen the horrors that we saw already. I think it's the refusal on the Israeli part to engage in the politics which makes this even more complicated. And the idea is that the morning after is somehow more secure. History suggests that without politics, we're still going to be in a place of insecurity. And I fear that not only will the next days and weeks and maybe longer be devastating for Palestinians, but it will also not bring security for Israelis, because there's not the political follow-up, there's not the addressing of the root causes.
Presented by
professionals that are in town, anything and everything, and right now they're getting ready for that. So the minute we'll know that the operation or the war is over, then we can start with the recovery piece.
A few days.
We don't know. I think everybody's kind of preparing us for at least a month. Yeah.
So Thank you, Eric, for talking
you
to
very
us.
much.
And it may take probably few months before situation would go back to normal. And situation has been pretty bad. We have seen all around the city, the blood-soaked streets, houses, they have been left like that, cars burned. Behind me, you could see there was a police station that used to be here. And what is left of this police station is all that a small puddle of water and rubbles. Those were removed from the site, just days before. Now the entire city, it looks ghostly. The cars that were attacked, and they were actually, totally damaged. People at home shot dead. It was a day of rest. People are not very hopeful about how soon the normalcy will return in the city, but they do hope that probably it will take few weeks or few months before the situation could be as safe and secure that people who have fled from the city would be returning back to their home. Meanwhile, the entire city and the perimeter of the city has been taken over by the Israeli Defense Forces, tanks, artilleries being fired, Israeli jets also flying over Gaza and dropping ammunition or missiles targeting Hamas locations. 2,400 or more than that people in Palestine, in Gaza, they have also been killed. Swiftly shifting towards the humanitarian crisis that is emerging in the Gaza Strip because of the number of casualties that has been going on there, humanitarian crisis that has emerged, food supplies shortage, medical supplies shortage, doctors having been killed, children having been killed. So the gory images of Israeli tragedy, and that is where the balance of geopolitics remains. We'll have to see whether the Israeli offensive will continue on the Gaza Strip or the diplomacy will take center stage, and there will. We are in Sderot, and this was the place which was worst hit during the 7th October terrorist attack by Hamas people. We are joined by Erith, and she will explain the kind of situation that is currently in city. Okay, so first to just give you some idea, we are still standing on the splattered blood remains, and this is a safe house that was probably also attacked, and many people were dragged out of this house and killed summarily. So Erith, how would you describe the situation in the city currently?
So right now we have about 4,000 to 5,000 people that stayed in the city. The rest of them have been evacuated, and they're living either with family outside of Sderot or in hotels. The government and the city is providing for them, making sure that they have everything that they need, from mental health support to clothing and food and provisions and anything that they need. And right now we're trying to take care of also, we have people on the ground from the municipality in every hotel and trying to see if there are any needs that come up, and whatever people need, we're taking care of.
So we know that on 7th of October there was total rampage and mayhem that was done by the terrorists. Right. I mean, if you could describe how the situation in the town on that day, how did it all
So what happened that day? Yes, so really, at 6 o'clock in the morning, sirens went off.
Hello, Namaskar. This is First Post, and you're watching Vantage with me, Palki Sharma. It's day 11 of the war. 9 p.m. in India, 6:30 p.m. in Israel, hours to go for US President Joe Biden to land. He will meet leaders of Israel, Jordan, Egypt,